Most people are afraid of coming home to an empty house. I came home early and I wish to God it had been empty. Welcome back to Dad's True Revenge. Grab your snacks, get comfortable, and remember the people in these stories have every chance to behave themselves. They just chose wrong. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. You're going to love it here. Let me tell you something about marriage. After 23 years of sharing a bed, a bank account, and a bathroom with someone, and trusting me, the bathroom part is the real test of love. You develop a sixth sense about them. You know when something is off. You feel it before you see it, like a smell in the air that doesn't belong. That Tuesday, I felt it the moment I turned into our street. I wasn't supposed to be home. My conference in Denver had wrapped up a full day early. Something about the keynote speaker having a personal emergency. Personally, I think he just looked at the audience and lost the will to live. Either way, I was on the first flight back. No calls made, no texts sent. I figured I'd surprise Cassandra, maybe pick up her favorite Thai food on the way, maybe actually sit across from my wife at dinner for once without a laptop between us. I was feeling good. I should have known better. The first thing I noticed was Preston's car in the driveway. Now Preston is my son. He is 26 years old, married to Lindsay for 2 years. They have their own apartment across town, a very nice apartment, I might add, that I helped furnish. So seeing his car at my house on a Tuesday afternoon wasn't just unusual, it was strange. Preston doesn't do pop-ins. Preston barely does scheduled visits. I sat in my car for a second and said out loud to nobody, "Warren, why is your son's car in your driveway on a Tuesday?" I had no answer for myself, so I grabbed my carry-on and walked to the front door. The second thing I noticed was the silence. Not the peaceful kind, not everyone is relaxing kind. The thick, heavy, wrong kind of silence. The kind that has weight to it. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. Preston and Lindsay were sitting in the living room together on the couch. And here's the part that still makes my skin crawl when I think about it. They weren't watching TV. They weren't on their phones. They were just sitting like two people in a waiting room who had already accepted whatever news was coming. Preston looked up first, and I want you to pay very close attention to what I'm about to tell you because this is the detail that changed everything for me. He wasn't surprised to see me. Think about that. Your father, who is supposed to be in Denver, walks through the front door a full day early, and you don't even flinch. No wide eyes. No, Dad, what are you doing here? Nothing. Just a slow blink and a look that I can only describe as calculated. Lindsay smiled, and I'm telling you that smile had no business being on anyone's face that afternoon. I said, What's going on? Where's your mother?" He cleared his throat and said, "Dad. Hey, we were actually just about to call you." "Were you?" I said, "It's flat. Not a question." "Mom had an episode this morning," he said. "She's at Mercy General, but she's stable." I didn't hear anything after Mercy General. I was back in my car in 11 seconds. I know because I counted. Something about shock does that to you. Makes your brain latch on to the most useless details, while the important ones try to kill you. I called Kurt on the way. Curtis Barnes has been my best friend since 1987. The man has seen me through a divorce scare, 2 recessions, and the absolute catastrophe that was my attempt at growing a beard in 2009. If there is anyone on this earth who will tell me the truth without wrapping it in bubble wrap first, it's Kurt. He picked up on the second ring. "Warren." "What's up, brother?" "Cassandra's in the hospital," I said. "Mercy General." I just got home and Preston and Lindsay were sitting in my living room like two people who already knew the ending of a movie. Dead silence on his end. "Then what do you mean?" "Like they already knew?" "Kurt." My son didn't even react when I walked through the door. "I was supposed to be in Denver." Another pause. Then, very quietly, he said, "Warren, I need you to stay calm." "I am calm," I said. "No," he said. "You're driving. That's not the same thing." He wasn't wrong. Mercy General was 15 minutes from my house. I made it in 9. I will not be taking questions about that. Dr. Beverly Nash met me at the nurse's station. She was a composed woman, mid-50s, the kind of doctor who delivers hard news with steady eyes and a voice that doesn't wobble. I appreciated that. I needed steady right then. She said, "Mr. Trevor, I'm glad you're here. Your wife was brought in this morning by your son. She presented with severe disorientation, organ stress, and elevated toxicity markers in her blood work." I said, "Toxicity markers?" She said, "Yes, we're running a full panel, but I want to be clear with you. The pattern we're seeing isn't consistent with a sudden illness. It suggests something that has been building." Building. That word hit me like a closed fist. I gripped the edge of the nurse's station and said very carefully, "Dr. Nash, are you telling me that something is being done to my wife?" She held my gaze and said, "I'm telling you that we need more answers, and I think you do too." I went in to see Cassandra and listen. I have seen my wife in every state imaginable. I've seen her laugh so hard she cried. I've seen her furious enough to make me genuinely reconsider my life choices. I've seen her exhausted, radiant, heartbroken, and everything in between. I was not prepared for what I saw in that room. She looked hollowed out, like someone had turned a dial inside her, and slowly, quietly drained everything that made her Cassandra. The machines beeped, the IV dripped, and my wife, the woman who once chased a contractor out of our kitchen with a wooden spoon for doing shoddy tile work, laid there looking impossibly small. I sat beside her and took her hand. And I made her a promise. I don't make promises lightly. Ask anyone who knows me. I told her, "I'm here. And I'm not leaving until I know exactly what happened to you." I walked back out to the waiting area. Preston and Lindsay have arrived. Of course, they had. Preston stood up and said, "Dad, we should talk. There's a lot you don't." I held up one hand. Just one, and something in my face must have communicated exactly where we stood because he stopped mid-sentence. I said, "Not yet." Then I walked to the corner of that waiting room, pulled out my phone, and started doing the one thing they never saw coming. I started locking every single account they had access to, every single one. And when the notifications started hitting their phones, because I knew they would, I watched Lindsay's face first. That smile she'd been carrying all afternoon evaporated just like that. Now we were having a conversation, and that right there was the moment I realized whatever was happening to my wife, I had just kicked the hornet's nest. The question was, how many hornets were inside? If you've made it this far, do us one quick favor. Subscribe. A lot of people watch without ever doing it, but it costs you nothing and means everything to us. Thank you sincerely. Let me tell you something about denial. Denial is comfortable. Denial is warm. Denial will pour you a cup of coffee, sit across from you, and tell you that everything is fine, that you're overreacting, that you're paranoid, that the people you love are incapable of the things your gut is screaming at you about. I have lived in denial for probably longer than I care to admit. But sitting in that hospital parking lot at 9:43 at night with my wife hooked up to machines 30 feet above me and my son's eyes burned into my memory, I evicted denial permanently, changed the locks and everything, and I called Kurt. He picked up before it even finished the first ring. "Talk to me," he said. "She looks terrible, Kurt," I said. And my voice did something embarrassing on that last word that I won't be elaborating on. The doctor used the word toxicity, said it's been building, not a sudden thing, something gradual. I heard him exhale slowly. Then Warren. "Gradual means deliberate." "I know what it means," I said. And Preston and Lindsay were in the house. They're in the waiting room right now. Silence. Then Kurt said something I will never forget as long as I live. He said, "Brother, you need to think very carefully about who has access to Cassandra's food, her drinks, her medication every day over the last few months. You need to think about who was around." And that's when it hit me. 4 months ago, Cassandra had twisted her ankle coming down the stairs. Nothing serious, a bad sprain. But Preston had swooped in almost immediately, and suggested that Lindsay, who worked part-time and had a flexible schedule, could come by the house every morning to help Cassandra with breakfast and her medications while I was at work. At the time, I thought it was generous. I actually told Kurt, maybe I misjudged that boy. I want to go back in time and slap myself, didn't want me to see, or she'd already received one. I sat down directly across from them. Preston said, Dad, I know how this looks. I said, do you, Preston? Walk me through exactly how you think this looks, because I'm genuinely curious. He shifted in his seat. Mom has been having health issues for a while. We were trying to help. Lindsay was coming by every morning making sure she ate, took her vitamins. Her vitamins? I repeated, yes. Which vitamins? He blinked. What? I said. Which vitamins? She takes 3 different supplements. Which ones was Lindsay giving her? He looked at Lindsay. Lindsay looked at her lap. And that right there, that 3-second exchange, told me everything I needed to know. I stood up and said, I'm going to need both of you to go home. Preston, reasonable man who suspects his son and daughter-in-law of poisoning his wife, would do. I started digging up every bank statement from the last 6 months. And listen, I'm not a forensic accountant. Small ones at first, 200 here, 350 there. The kind of amounts that don't scream at you, they whisper. But when I added them up, we were looking at close to $11,000 over 5 months. From a joint account that Cassandra and I shared and that Preston had limited access to for emergencies. $11,000. I called Kurt at 2 o'clock in the morning. He answered like it was noon. 11,000, I said, without even saying hello. From which account? The joint household account. Small withdrawals. Consistent. Like someone who knew exactly how to stay under the radar. Kurt was quiet for a moment. Then Warren, that's not impulsive. That's planned. That's someone who sat down and thought about how to do this without getting caught. My son, I clear throat said, and I'll be honest with you. Those 2 words almost broke me right there in that waiting room at 2 o'clock in the morning. My son sat down and planned this. We don't know that for certain yet, Kurt said carefully. Kurt, I know, he said quietly. I know. The next morning, Dr. Beverly Nash found me exactly where she'd left me, in that waiting room, looking like a man who had been through a war and lost. She sat down beside me, which doctors don't typically do, and I noticed and she said, Mr. Trevor. The full panel came back. I said, tell me straight. She said, your wife has elevated levels of a compound consistent with long-term ingestion of a specific heavy metal. The levels suggest consistent exposure over a period of months. Her kidneys are under significant stress. We've started treatment, and I want to be clear. We caught this. She has a strong chance of recovery. I closed my eyes just for a second. Then I said, Dr. Nash, if someone were doing this deliberately, how would they administer it? She paused. Then very carefully, she said, it could be introduced through food, through drink, through supplements, particularly powder-based ones that dissolve easily and have no distinct taste. I heard Preston's voice in my head. Lindsay was coming by every morning making sure she ate. Took her vitamins. I stood up so fast my chair scraped the floor, and Dr. Nash put a hand on my arm. Mr. Trevor, I need to make a phone call, I said. I called my attorney first. Then I called the bank and had every remaining account locked, restructured, and password protected with codes that only I and my attorney had access to. I removed Preston's emergency access. I removed the automatic transfers. I removed everything. Within 20 minutes, my phone started ringing. Preston, 4 times. Lindsay, twice. Then a text from Preston that said, Dad, what did you do? Why can't I access anything? Call me back right now. Right now. Caps. And everything. I stared at that message for a long time. This was a young man who as recently as Christmas had hugged me at the door and told me I was the best father he could have asked for. I had believed him. I had beamed with pride over that. I may have even told Kurt about it. I typed back one sentence. You should have thought about that before you touched my wife. I mattered. She was going to wake up. Dr. Nash said so. And when she did, I was going to be the first face she saw. But there was something else now. Something cold and focused sitting in my chest where the fear used to be because I still didn't know why. $11,000 and a poisoned wife don't happen without a reason. People don't do something this calculated, this patient, without a destination in mind. I needed to find out where they were trying to go. I called Kurt one more time that evening. He answered immediately. How's she doing? Stable. Getting treatment. Nash says she'll pull through. Thank God, he breathed. Kurt, I said, I need you to do something for me. I need you to find out if Cassandra recently changed anything. A will, an insurance policy, anything with my name or Preston's name on it. Silence then. Warren, you clear your throat? Think this is about money? I think, I said slowly, that my son needed $11,000 badly enough to take it without asking, and I thought whatever he needed it for was just the down payment. Kurt exhaled. I'll make some calls, he said. I didn't know it yet, but by morning, Kurt was going to find something that would make $11,000 look like pocket change, and it was going to change everything. Running. So, thank you for real. Revenge is a dish best served cold, but I prefer mine served at exactly the right temperature. Warm enough to sting, precise enough to scar, and delivered with a smile that they'll spend the rest of their lives trying to forget quietly through a phone call on an otherwise unremarkable Thursday morning, while you're drinking bad hospital coffee and watching the sun come up through a waiting room window. That's how mine arrived. Kurt called at 7:14 in the morning. I know the exact time because I was staring at the clock, willing the minutes to move faster so I could go back in and check on Cassandra. He didn't say hello. He just said, Warren, you need to brace yourself. I sat down my coffee and said, Tell me. 6 weeks before Cassandra ended up in that ICU, she had visited an estate attorney alone without telling me, which knowing Cassandra meant she was planning a surprise of some kind. Cassandra was a planner. Birthdays, anniversaries, Christmas. The woman could orchestrate a military operation around a dinner party. What she had done was updating her life insurance policy. The original policy had Preston listed as the secondary beneficiary. Standard. Something we'd set up years ago when he was young. Cassandra had gone in to update it, to remove Preston entirely, and redirect everything to a charitable trust she had been quietly building for 2 years, a literacy foundation for underprivileged kids, something she'd never told me about because she wanted to present it as a fully functioning thing before she did. That was Cassandra. Never half measures. The policy was worth $2.3 million. Preston had been found out. I don't know how, and honestly, that detail almost doesn't matter. But he had found out that his mother was about to cut him out of $2.3 million. And instead of picking up the phone and having a conversation like a grown man, he and Lindsay had sat down and decided that the most reasonable response was to make sure Cassandra didn't live long enough to finalize the paperwork. The attorney has a 30-day processing window. Cassandra had 30 days left on that window when she collapsed. 30 days. My wife has 30 days left to live in their plan. I sat with that information for a long time. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just sat in that plastic waiting room chair and let the full weight of it settle onto my chest like a stone. Then I stood up, straightened my jacket, and walked to the window. And I made a decision. I wasn't going to be loud about this. I wasn't going to be sloppy. I wasn't going to confront Preston in a hospital hallway and give him the opportunity to lawyer up on my dime and turn this into a circus. I was going to be methodical. I called my attorney, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Margaret Holloway, who had been practicing law for 30 years and had the energy of someone who genuinely enjoyed watching people face consequences. I told her everything: the withdrawals, the supplements, the insurance policy, the timing, all of it. She was quiet for exactly 4 seconds. Then she said, Warren, don't touch anything in that house. Don't confront either of them. Don't post anything, say anything, or hint at anything. Can you do that? I can do that, I said. Good, she said. Because I'm going to make sure that when this lands, it lands completely. No cracks, no exits. I said, Margaret, I want them to feel every single inch of this. She said, honey, by the time I'm done, they'll feel the square footage. I almost smiled. Almost. The next 72 hours were the longest of my life. Cassandra was improving. Dr. Nash was cautiously optimistic. The treatment was working. Her kidney function was stabilizing. And on the second day, she opened her eyes and looked at me and said in the most exhausted, gravelly version of her voice, Warren, you look terrible. And I laughed. I actually laughed out loud in the ICU. The nurse looked at me like I had lost my mind. Maybe I had. But hearing Cassandra's sarcasm, that specific brand of loving, devastating sarcasm that I had taken for granted for 23 years, felt like someone had reached into my chest and restarted something. I leaned forward and said, You're in the ICU and you're criticizing my appearance. She said very weakly but very distinctly, Someone has to. I held her hand and I did not let go for a very long time. I didn't tell her everything yet. She needed to heal first. The full truth can wait, but I told her she was safe. I told her I knew what had happened, and I told her that everything was being handled. She looked at me for a long moment with those sharp eyes of hers, the ones that had always looked straight through me, and she said, It was Preston, wasn't it? Not a question. A statement. I didn't answer. I just held her hand tighter. She closed her eyes and said quietly, I always knew that boy had my worst qualities, and none of my best ones. Even half-conscious in a hospital bed, Cassandra Trevor was the most formidable woman I had ever known. On day 4, Margaret called me with news that rearranged my entire face. Kurt, God bless that man, had quietly obtained surveillance footage from a pharmacy 2 towns over. Preston had purchased a specific supplement brand on 3 separate occasions over 4 months, always paying cash, always alone, except once, the 3rd visit, when the exterior camera caught Lindsay waiting in the car. The supplement contains trace amounts of a compound that in large enough doses administered consistently over time produces exactly the toxicity profile Dr. Nash had found in Cassandra's blood work. Margaret also had the bank records. She had a digital trail of the withdrawals. She had the estate attorney confirming the timeline of the insurance update and Preston's subsequent inquiries because Preston, in what I can only describe as a breathtaking act of audacity, had actually called the estate attorney's office, posing as Cassandra's personal assistant, to ask about the status of the policy changes. He had left a callback number, his own cell phone number. I will give you a moment to absorb that. My son, this man who had planned a months-long poisoning campaign with the patience of a chess grandmaster, had called the estate attorney from his own personal cell phone. When Kurt told me, I stared at the wall for a full 10 seconds, and then said, Kurt, did I raise a criminal mastermind or a complete idiot? Kurt said, Brother, the answer is somehow both. They came to the hospital on day 5, together carrying flowers and wearing the expressions of 2 people who had decided that a charm offensive was their best remaining strategy. Preston walked in first, saw me standing in the corridor and immediately deployed a smile that did not reach his eyes by approximately 40 meters. He said, Dad, how is she? We've been so worried. I looked at him, then at Lindsay, then back at him, and I said, She's awake. She's talking and she's going to make a full recovery. I watched something flicker behind his eyes. It wasn't a relief. It wasn't joy. It was a very fast, very brief recalculation. The kind of person makes when a plan has failed and they need to figure out what comes next. Lindsay said. That's such wonderful news, Warren. The police are on their way, I said. Just like that. Flat calm. The same tone I might use to mention that it was supposed to rain on Friday. Preston's face drained of color so quickly it was almost medically impressive. He said, What? Margaret Holloway filed everything this morning, I said. The pharmacy receipts, the bank records, the telephone call to the estate attorney, doctor, Nash's toxicology report. All of it, every piece, in a very neat package. Lindsay made a sound that I can only describe as a person's physical composition leaving their body. Preston said, "Dad, just listen for 1 second, okay? Just let me, because I am, despite everything, his father. There is nothing you can say to me right now. There is not a sentence in the English language that covers this. So, I need you to stop talking." He opened his mouth. I closed it. I opened it again. I said, "The flowers are nice, though. Cassandra will appreciate them from someone else." They were arrested in the hospital parking lot. I watched from the window. Margaret had timed it with the precision of a woman who understood that optics matter. They were still holding the flowers when the officers approached. Preston tried to talk his way through it because Preston has always believed that his voice is his most powerful tool. Lindsay went quiet in a way that suggested she was already calculating a plea arrangement. Kurt appeared beside me at the window. I don't even know when he arrived. He just materialized the way he always does when things matter most. We stood there together and watched. He said, "How do you feel?" I thought about it honestly and I said, "Like I aged 10 years and 5 days. Like I want to sleep for a month. Like I am simultaneously the saddest I have ever been and the most certain I have ever felt about anything in my life." Then he said, "And Cassandra?" I looked back toward her room down the corridor. Through the small, rectangular window in her door, I could see the shape of her in the bed, the monitors, the soft light. I said, "Cassandra is going to be fine. Cassandra was always going to be fine. She's the toughest person I know. And she married me. Which proves she can survive anything." Kurt laughed. A real one. It bounced off the corridor walls, and for just a moment, the weight lifted. 3 months later, Cassandra comes home. She walked through the front door of our house on a Saturday morning in October, when the light was doing that golden thing it does in fall, and she stood in the hallway and looked around like she was cataloging everything she had almost lost. Then she turned to me and said, "Warren, the kitchen needs repainting." I said, "Absolutely not. I just painted it 2 years ago." She said, "It's the wrong shade of white. There is only one shade of white, Cassandra. That," she said, pointing at the wall with the authority of a woman who had stared down death, "is not white. That is the color of a bureaucratic apology." I looked at the wall. I looked at her. I pulled out my phone and called a painter. Preston and Lindsay faced charges of attempted murder, conspiracy, and financial fraud. Margaret Holloway was prosecuted with the energy of someone who had been waiting her entire career for a case this clean. The trial lasted 11 days. The verdict took the jury 4 hours. They were sentenced significantly. I won't give you the number because, frankly, whatever number I say won't feel like enough. What I will tell you is that when the verdict was read, I was sitting in that courtroom next to Cassandra, who was holding my hand with a grip that could have been steel, and when it was over, she leaned over to me and said very quietly, "I want Thai food." I said, "Right now?" She said, "I have been thinking about Thai food for 3 months. Warren, don't test me." So, we got Thai food. Kurt came, Margaret came, Dr. Beverly Nash, who Cassandra had apparently charmed completely during her recovery, came. We sat around a table and we ate and we laughed. And I watched my wife gesture wildly while telling a story and I thought, there she is, there's Cassandra. I said at the beginning of this story that I came home early and I wish to God the house was empty. I take that back. I'm glad I came home. I'm glad I walked through that door. I am glad I saw what I saw and felt what I felt and moved the way I moved, because if I had landed 1 day later, if that conference had run its full schedule, if I had stayed in Denver 1 more night, Cassandra wouldn't have made it, and I would have spent the rest of my life not knowing why. So, no, I don't wish the house had been empty. I wish my son had been the man I thought I raised. But you can't control what people choose to become in the dark. You can only control what you do when the lights come on. I came home. I turned the lights on. and I made sure that every single person in that house faced exactly what they had done. That's the job. That's always been the job. If you like this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories. And as always, thank you for being a part of this sphere.